Welcome back, everybody. Today I want to take a look at literary criticism. This will be the beginning of our second unit for this class. And so exam two is going to cover from everything from here up until all the way through music. And so what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to print out the study guide. It has a list of terms on there and have that with you as we go through the lectures of the next couple of weeks. It'll help you to know what to focus on, some of the main ideas, some of the themes to consider, and it'll help prepare you for exam two. So hopefully you'll be able to do that as you follow along. Today I wanted to take a look at literary criticism to deepen our understanding of literature, and I want to teach you how people that are professionals, professional literary critics, approach a particular work of art or work of literature. And part of this is going to require you to develop and deepen your language, and so we can talk about common ideas or common techniques. Developing a language is an important way to do this. And so, very similar to what we did with the visual arts, where we went through a list of terms and I was showing you how, these terms like lines and shadings and things of that nature worked. And then we went through medium. It was mainly designed to get you to think about how to start to describe and experience some of these things and to deepen our appreciation. I want to continue that trend as we go throughout the rest of the classes we cover here literature, or as we cover later music, or as we eventually get to with film. The first thing that I wanted to take a look at is what is known as active reading. Now, this is what I want to encourage uh, from you for the rest of your lives, right? So whatever reading you were doing beforehand, I want to focus your attention on active reading. What this does as you approach a work of literature, is it focuses on the argument of the author, right? So that's the number one thing. When I'm reading a work of literature, in the back of my mind, I have what is the author trying to say to me? What's the message, right? So it's not as though an artist or an author just sits down and creates something just out of kind of randomness. Generally, an author has something to say. And so in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, what does the author really have to say, right? Just like what we talked about with the visual arts, that there are no mistakes in masterpieces. Everything is carefully crafted. We have a similar idea within literature, that masterpieces within literature have no mistakes in them, right? The author has carefully constructed the chapters, the characters, the wording, the language in such a way to create an overall effect, right? So as a author finishes a novel, for instance, he or she then goes back and starts to edit it, which is a different process than writing. He or she has to make a decision on what chapters to keep, what ones to eliminate, which characters to keep, which ones to get rid of. And so when we finally see that final product, it's an important thing to think about. What is the author saying and how does he or she convey that, right? So it's recognizing the use of literary elements in the narrative and making connections about these elements to understand their significance within the story. And so this is getting you to think deeper about the story. What they've done is they've done a study of college students all throughout the nation. What they found is that this is what's really lacking in a lot of classrooms, is this idea of active reading. What they found is that students will do the reading. If a teacher says, "Hey, go and read The Sun Also Rises," for instance, um, the students will go and read it, right? But what they're really thinking in the back of their minds is, how much longer do I have to read this? When is the end of the story? I'm hungry. What do I want for dinner? Bacon sounds good, right? So they're not really thinking about the actual story. What I've done within this class is I've shortened the amount of reading, so you're not reading like hundreds and hundreds of pages, but I've shortened the amount of reading so that you can have time to actually think about it. So I don't want you just rushing through. I want you to read through it, and then think about the actual argument and these elements that we're going to cover today, right? The first thing that I think about as I approach a work of literature is the point of view, right? This is the perspective in which the story is told. And what I'm thinking about, not only am I thinking about what the author and his or her argument, I'm thinking about the narrator, who the author chose to tell this story. And that's going to tell me a whole lot about it. If it's written in first person, right, the I and the me, right, we're going to see that language throughout. What the I and me says is that the narrator is in the actual story, is a participant, is a character. The narrator is a character inside the story that's causing the action to go forward. That's going to tell me a whole lot because that's going to tell me that there's a lot of tunnel vision that's happening, right? I can't see beyond the narrator's perspective. All I can see is through the narrator's eyes. And I have to realize as I approach that, that that's going to be a limited experience for me, that I'm going to be able to encounter certain biases. I'm going to see the characters and interact with them through that one person. But I'm going to have to also understand that I'm not really being able to see it beyond that person and see through the eyes of the other characters, right? So the narrator, for instance, might see another character as evil, quote unquote, but I have to then realize that maybe that person is not necessarily evil. It's just being interpreted as evil by the character, right? We all kind of have those biases, and whatever story we're telling, right? If I was to tell a story of my life, it's going to mainly be, the people that I like are going to be represented in a different way than the people that I don't necessarily, get along with, right? And that's just the nature of humanity. An example of first person narration is The Great Gatsby. Nick Carraway is the narrator commenting on the action. So he is a character within the story telling us about his own personal experiences. And we have to realize that as we go throughout the story that he's going to make certain mistakes. And we see that a lot. If you've ever read The Great Gatsby, Nick Carraway makes a lot of misjudgments. Throughout the story, he makes some false impressions. He makes some mistakes, and so that helps us to really understand what's going on within the narrative, that idea of that limited understanding of the character, how he or she relates to others. Second person is a lot more rare than first or third person. What second person is whenever the narrator stops and refers to the audience. Right, and so directs our attention. This is a way of the narrator suggesting that there needs to be more elaboration or explanation about this particular moment. And so he or she then turns to the audience and says, "You, right? I'm talking to you. This is what you need to say." And so it's a kind of a further commentary on that. Ferris Bueller does that. If you've ever seen that film, if you haven't, I recommend it. It's really kind of an 80s kind of fluff film, kind of a nice Friday night kind of date night movie. Um, but what happens throughout is Ferris Bueller kind of turns to the camera and gives his own personal perspective, his own personal biases, his own philosophy on life. And those are important moments because the author chooses to put those and include those for a specific reason. The third person is going to be the most common way perspective, right? This is whenever in literature you see the terms his or her or he or she, you're right, they. The narrator is not an active participant within the story. He or she just kind of sets back from it and just comments on the actions. And so what happens within the third person is that you can get a lot more insights into different characters, into their perspective, into their understanding. And so we see a little bit different kind of and ideas that are starting to emerge. And Mulan's a good example of this. It just recently came out. We do see mainly through the eyes of Mulan, who is the protagonist, but we also get to kind of see it through the eyes of the villain, right? So it's not as though we only see through her eyes. We see through other characters' eyes, and that gives us a little bit more texture, a little bit more dynamics to the particular elements within the story. And so these are stylistic choices and how the story is told, whether it's going to be first person, second person, or third person. Thinking about some other elements of narration, some different techniques, thinking about the word choices that authors use. And alliteration is the repetition of the first sound of words within a sentence or phrase. Example, Sally sells seashells by the seashore, right? So that idea of that S is repeated throughout. Consonant is the repetition of the final consonant sounds within the sentence or phrase, and so that last sound within a word. Pete ate a great plate late, which sealed his fate, right? And so you hear that again and again. And so as authors are thinking about how to tell the story, they're also thinking about stylistic ways, right? Not just, telling the story, the factual elements of the story, but also thinking about kind of more of a creative way to tell the story to make it a little bit more interesting to draw the reader in. Asonance is a repetition of a sound produced by vowels within a sentence or phrase. Example, hear the mellow wedding bells, golden bells, right? So that L, the vowel sound is repeated throughout. Thinking about irony. Irony is different from the way that we generally use irony when we say, isn't that ironic, right? What we really mean by that, isn't that really coincidental, or isn't that just kind of a feeling of happenstance or something of that nature? But dramatic irony is different. Dramatic irony is the gap between what the protagonist knows and what the reader knows. Whenever the reader knows more than the protagonist, then there's that irony. And a good example of this comes from Kung Fu Panda 3, when Po is kind of encounters the other panda in the first part of the film, and everyone else knows that the other panda is Po's father, right? Except for Po, right? You kind of have that moment of tension and that moment of humor. That's dramatic irony, right? And he doesn't really catch on for a few minutes. That's dramatic irony. And I'm going to try to give you a couple examples. I've already referred to Mulan. Here we have Kung Fu Panda. I'm trying to refer to examples that everyone within the class can at least have some experience or have some basic knowledge about. So we'll kind of go through that. Figurative language, again, this is just to build upon the language, the way that things are presented to us. This is the use of non-literal language that provides richer literary effect, adding texture to the story. A metaphor is when one element is said to be something that is entirely different. Example, brokenhearted, when we hear the term brokenhearted, that doesn't mean that someone's heart's literally broken in pieces, right? Or when we say the light of the world, right? We're not necessarily meaning a flashlight here. We're being a light of knowledge, a light of truth, right? Well, I don't give up on us even if the skies get rough. Well, the literal meaning of that, the sky's getting rough, is I'm not going to give up on us even if there's a storm coming in today. Well, the actual meaning that's referred to here is the skies of a relationship gets rough, right? And so just using ways to kind of enhance the language, to enhance the meaning, so we can find deeper meaning to it, right? A simile is when one element is described as similar to something else rather than as something else is similar to, right? Sweet as honey or hard as nails, right? And then symbols is when one thing stands for something else. And this is an important part that I want you to think about. I want you to think about symbols within the stories, right? As we take a look at a couple stories with hills like white elephants, and we'll take a look at the Indian camp. I want you to think about symbols within the story, things that might represent something else, right? Some deeper meaning, and it's just a way for authors to kind of imprint different meanings rather than have to just specifically just tell us things and just say something like, "Hey, dummy, this is what I mean by this," right? They don't necessarily want that. They want you to be able to kind of come together with your own understanding and pull your own kind of meaning from it. And so they use different techniques to be able to do that. I also want you to pay the second thing that I do within a story as I approach it. I first take a look at how it's presented to us, who's the narrator, And then the second thing I think of about is who are the characters, right? A person in a narrative work, they can be described directly by the narrator or indirectly through the character's thoughts, actions, and or words. And so, for instance, it could be told to us, directly, right? This character is 5'6", black hair, blue eyes, whatever the case may be. Or it could be told through us indirectly, right? This character gets up early. He goes to work. He always, he always stops by the bagel shop on Tuesday mornings at 9, right? So what we see is that this character not directly being told to us, but indirectly, we get a sense that this person's very regimented, right? Has a kind of a set routine. So it can either be told to us directly or indirectly. But this is all important information to think about why is it presented. A protagonist is the central character in the story, who the story is generally about. Here you see Luke Skywalker is the central character of, the first three stories or episodes within the Star Wars saga. The antagonist is the character that brings about the conflict. I debated between putting this between Darth Vader and Emperor Palpatine as we think about who is the true antagonist. It seems to me that the true antagonist of the story is actually Emperor Palpatine. It seems like Darth Vader is just kind of a tragic hero. The anti-hero is the central character in the story that represents deviations from the normal expectations of a hero, and Shrek is probably a good modern example of the anti-hero, kind of doing things not the normal way, right? He doesn't ride up to save the princess in a majestic steed or something like that. He rides up on a donkey, right? And he doesn't necessarily try to, slay the dragon first. He tries to rescue it, right? And so he's doing things that are against the norm, right? So any type of character that deviates from this, and this is something that we see a lot within our contemporary films and literatures, are heroes that are not necessarily filling the normal, right? Kind of pushing against that. And we see that a lot with characters today who are untrained or untutored. They're just considered quote unquote the normal guy, but they're put into this abnormal situation. And so, in that sense, they kind of become this kind of quasi anti-hero. Foil is a character that contrasts with another character, typically the protagonist. Sherlock Holmes and Watson, right? Watson's the foil to Sherlock Holmes. He's the one that Sherlock Holmes explains things to. Donkey is the foil to Shrek, right? Kind of a contrasting character where Shrek is kind of serious and grumpy. The donkey is a completely kind of open and hilarious, right? A dynamic type of character. Another thing that I think about is what type of characters are they? A dynamic character is a character that generally is often the hero, but not always, that undergoes emotional, intellectual, physical, and or spiritual change that lead to a change in behavior. And so, any type of character that undergoes some type of change, as we see here with Mulan, she's going to undergo a physical change, but also she's going to undergo some behavioral changes as she does that, right? She assumes the identity of a man going to war. She's going to change her behavior from what it was, what she's supposed to be doing back in her hometown. A static character is a character that undergoes very little emotional change, intellectual or physical or spiritual changes, and they don't necessarily lead to a change in behavior. So a character that doesn't really change a whole lot within a story, where Mulan is changing, right, who she is, and that's going to change her overall effect and who she's going to become. A static character, by contrast, is a character that doesn't change at all, right? So I would think that this is my own kind of interpretation that Genie is a good example of this, where Aladdin's kind of changing in the story of Aladdin. The genie doesn't really change. We do see that he's freed, quote unquote, freed at the end of the story, but he's still kind of the same kind of person, right? Still kind of the same kind of character. And so there seems to be very little change within him. A flat character is a character that only has one personality trait. right? So I think Mushu, which I was saddened to find out that the new Mulan doesn't have Mushu in it. I don't know how they missed that one. I guess they're trying to make it more quote unquote real, but more often than not, flat characters do not undergo a significant change and are static, right? So flat characters, they're just generally, they have one type of personality, nothing, there's no depth to them, right? Think about an archetype, other type of I think I left out one. One of them that I left out was a round character. By contrast, a round character is a character that has deep kind of emotional, personal traits that cause kind of changes within them. So a different type of character, right? Flat's not going to be very limited, very superficial. A round character is going to be much more dynamic in their character. Other type of characters are going to be and archetypes are another way that another device that authors use. These are generally shortcuts to kind of use conventions that they don't have to go into a large explanation about what's happening. These are just kind of common motifs that we can kind of pick up on. These are overgeneralized character that conveys a well-established or well-expected thought or idea. 12 main archetypes are the innocent or the regular guy slash gal, the hero, the caregiver, the explorer, the rebel, the lover, the creator, the jester, the sage, magician, the ruler. And so here you see from Batman Begins, you have the hero, also kind of the fits the regular guy with Bruce Wayne, and then you have Ra's al Ghul, who is the teacher, right? The one that's going to the sage that's going to teach him all the techniques that he needs to kind of change to become the Batman. The setting. Another thing I want you to think about is the location, right? This becomes kind of a character in the story, right? Because an author can put a story anywhere in the world, right? Why does the author choose to put it here, right? This is the physical time, place, or social environment in which the work takes place. Like a painting, it is the background in which the story, transpires, takes place, which can be just as important as the action, right? So I want you to consider where does the action take place? When does it take place? How does the social environment influence the thoughts and actions of the characters? Because these all become extremely important within the overall context of the story. So have that in the back of your mind as well. So the third thing I think about, right? So the first thing I'm thinking about is how is it told to me? Who's the narrator? Who are the characters? Is the second thing. The third thing I think about is who's what's the setting, right? And how does the setting influence the narrative and how does it influence the characters? Um, Other things to think about, right? As we think about the action of the story, is the plot is the action of the story, right? What happens? I want you to think about that. I want you to know what the plot is. That's going to be another major element. But I want you to think about, is it linear, right? Does the action take place chronologically? Does it move from one moment to the next? Is it non-linear? Does that action occur non-chronologically? That moves from the first moment to the last. It could start at the end and then work its way backwards, right? Or it could start at the middle and move to the beginning and then the end, right? So it can kind of jump around, right? That's going to be an important part of how the story is presented to us because the author is telling us or choosing which moments to emphasize first, right? How to order them. That's going to be an important part. A flashback is part of a non-linear story that provides relevant background information, gives us richer context into the characters. And then foreshadowing is a way of looking forward, right? It hints at a later plot point. So these are all important elements to think about. And the last thing that I think about is I think about all of these ideas in total as after I read the story, I kind of put it down and then I kind of get away from it. I could probably go for a walk or something. And then the back of my mind, I start thinking, what was the point, right? What was the main idea? How do these ideas all fit together? And so I think about what's the theme. The theme is the main issue in the story that helps to reveal a deeper understanding to the human condition. So another thing that I think about is how the story, what message is being told. And so these are some things to think about as we move forward. The next part two is going to take a look at Aristotelian components, and these are also going to be things that I want you to be aware of and to think about as we go through literature.